Defense wins championships, and today I'm bringing you my week 7 defensive rankings video. If you like defense and you like winning, hit that like and subscribe button as we are on the way to 3,000 subscribers here on the 4for4 Fantasy Football YouTube channel. I recently just redid my model for defense where we take into account the over-unders, or we take into account game scripts and how these offenses have been playing in recent weeks. And we started off here in the S tier. And the first guy, and this is the elite level defense this week for me, is going to be the Denver Broncos going up against the Giants. We just saw the Denver Broncos defense, what they did to Justin Fields. Now, every defense is doing what they did to Justin Fields in week 6. But the thing is, the line is at 41 points, -7 for the Denver Broncos. And really, this the part, as much as it's looked good for Jackson Dart the last few weeks, we've liked what we've seen from Cam Scadaboo. The Giants are still averaging under 21 points, and they're really ranked bottom 5 in yards per drive. So this is really where I feel like the Denver Broncos can get their game absolutely humming this week as the #1 defense for me in my rankings. Definitely want to be taking a shot on the Denver Broncos versus this new Jackson Dart. It's exciting, but I do want to be going towards them. It's also a home favorite. We love playing defenses when they're at home. So like I said, lock and load the Denver Broncos defense. Now, next team in this tier, it is going to be the New England Patriots versus the Tennessee Titans. And before we get into the actual numbers, we saw Cam Ward. There were flashes this last week versus the Raiders, but I just want to be said that it is very sad how this Tennessee Titans team is doing overall. Brian Callahan, it's not looking great. Cam Ward has had flashes, but it also hasn't looked great. They only put up 10 points in week 6. So if you're talking about a team that is going to be in need and wanting to score some points, I look at this New England Patriots defense, who even this last week versus New Orleans put up 6 fantasy points. They put up 9 the week before against Buffalo. But if we're taking a look kind of into the model and into the setup, like we said, over-under on this game is 43.5 points. It's -6 for the New England Patriots. Tennessee's offense is just super flat. Like, that's all I can say. There's not a ton of upside here for the Tennessee Titans. So I think New England, as long as they can lock down the Tennessee Titans overall offense, which I don't think is going to be that hard, especially when we're considering, is Calvin Ridley even going to be playing in week 7 fantasy football? Like I said, I want to be taking all the shots here on the New England Patriots as the #2 overall defense. My #3 overall defense is going to be the Kansas City Chiefs, who are going into this matchup versus the Raiders. And I look at Kansas City, and they put up 3 fantasy points versus Detroit, but they've kind of been this whole defense for Kansas City, as much as they're ranked the #16 defense in fantasy football. I look at them going into this week, and they've had the last 3 weeks, 8 fantasy points versus Baltimore, 8 fantasy points versus Jacksonville, only 3 fantasy points versus Detroit. It really hasn't been a great stretch. And we look at, like, the only game where they didn't go up against another prolific level offense was against the Giants, where they put up 12 fantasy points in that game. Now, granted, Russell Wilson was playing. It was a good game script because the Giants offense hadn't found their sort of rhythm that they kind of do now. But when we're looking at them this week versus Vegas, we're looking at a Vegas team that continues. They look good against the Titans, but they only put up 20 points versus the Titans. This is a huge spread with 46.5 points with the over-under, where it's -10.5 for Kansas City. Like I said, Mahomes is going to get them the lead. We got Rashee Rice coming back into this game, so I'm assuming that the Kansas City Chiefs offense is going to look even better than it did versus the Lions, and they're going to take that next step. And when you have that sort of spread, that lets the Kansas City Chiefs really pressure, have turnovers, and really that kind of follows with the fantasy points. So like I said, the Raiders have allowed also multiple sacks this season in multiple games. This is a smash start for the Kansas City Chiefs. And so if you want to go get them right now, like I said, they're only 29% rostered over on Sleeper. So I think they are a great streaming defense if you are in need of a streaming defense. Now, the last team in this like S tier of defense, it's going to be the Green Bay Packers. And the Green Bay Packers didn't have the best day versus the Bengals. You would have thought, hey, they're absolutely going to demolish, but Joe Burrow came in and they ended up putting up 18 points against the Green Bay Packers. And we are now going into kind of back-to-back weeks. They had the bye in week 5 where -3 fantasy points versus Dallas, 2 fantasy points versus Cincinnati. You're like, man, this was It's supposed to be the elite level defense. They're, a bottom 20s defense for fantasy football. But this week they're going up against the Arizona Cardinals. Now the over-under in this game, according to Vegas, is 45.5 points, where the Green Bay Packers are minus 5.5 point favorites. Now, we saw Arizona score 27 points last week without Kyler Murray, but that was really against the Colts defense that wasn't able to really finish drives. So for me, I just look at the Green Bay Packers overall team, and they are just continuing to force sacks each and every week. Now, we had 4 sacks in the first 2 weeks. Last week, last game against Cincinnati only had that 1 sack. They weren't able to get any sort of interceptions. They weren't able to get any sort of touchdowns. So maybe not as high of a scoring output, but I think especially with the fact that we don't know what's happening with Kyler Murray in week 7 fantasy football, we don't know what's happening with Marvin Harrison Jr. I just continue to think that this overall defense is something that's going to hold down this week in my projections. And so that's kind of why I have them here sliding in as my defense number 4. Now, moving on to tier number 2, we started off with team number 5 in the rankings. It's going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Bengals. Cincinnati, like I said, last week, even though they've given up pressures on this season, we saw Joe Flacco really be able to hang in there in the pocket and sling the ball. But we look at them kind of the last 2 weeks, in week 4, and then they had the bye in week 5, and then week 6. They had 6 sacks in each of those games. And so TJ Watt is absolutely getting after it. Now, interceptions, they are up to 5 interceptions this season, so almost an interception a game. And so I just think there's plenty of opportunity here for turnovers. I do think they'll probably give up a few more points than the Green Bay Packers gave up to the Cincinnati Bengals last week. It's another week of Joe Burrow getting comfortable in this offense. But I do think it is worthy of a spot start for the Pittsburgh Steelers in this matchup versus Cincinnati. Like I said, I am not convinced on the Cincinnati Bengals tackles at all. And so I definitely want to be taking a shot on this game. And like I said, even as the underdog, because right now Cincinnati is projected to win, I still want to be taking a shot with the odds that TJ Watt and these edges can make something of this overall offense. Absolutely love this matchup for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, next team in this tier, it is going to be the Cleveland Browns. So it's going to be my team number 6. It's going to be Cleveland Browns versus the Dolphins. Like we said, the line right now is minus 1.5 with the over-under at 41.5 points. Right now, this is the lowest total on the slate, and that is mainly because we've seen Dolphins offense is desolate of talent right now with Tyreek Hill going out with the injury and with Mike McDaniel and Tua Tagovailoa going at it, clashing a little bit this last week, as well as the Cleveland Browns with Dylan Gabriel. Like we said, this is just Cleveland is giving up very, very little points at home, and this is going to be really forcing Tua Tagovailoa into, he's always a drop back quarterback, but they're really going to be forcing him this week. And so as much as we haven't seen this really great, I mean, you'd probably call it a great real-life defense, but it really hasn't been great for fantasy football. I do think this matchup versus Miami is interesting enough, and they're only 25% roster, so they're available in 75% of leagues. Like I said, I think this week in particular for fantasy football, some of these defenses, they're not the greatest matchup. So even as we go through the top 15, you're going to have to be taking some shots on defenses that you might not typically want to be taking a shot on, but I do like the Cleveland Browns here in this overall number 2 tier versus the Dolphins. Next team, it's going to be the Seattle Seahawks, who have maybe been the best or the second best defense for fantasy football this season, where even versus the Jacksonville Jaguars team, where we saw Brian Thomas Jr. absolutely, pop off, they still put up 11 fantasy points. And the main reason is they only gave up 12 points. They had 7 total sacks. This team is absolutely getting after the quarterback. And in recent weeks, even in week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, we saw a ton of interceptions as well. Now, their secondary has been pretty banged up, so you can maybe assume that's why, the front 7 was absolutely demolishing. But in week 7 versus Houston, this could even be a little bit low of a ranking for the Seattle Seahawks. They should maybe even be a little bit higher in my rankings as I'm kind of talking about it, because they definitely get after the quarterback. We've seen this Houston Texans offensive line struggle against a quality pass rush. And like I said, they're still kind of learning how to play together with no Laramie Tunsil. And really the only real receiving threat is Nico Collins. And the other thing is this is at home. So I absolutely love sometimes too when we're looking at defenses and you get to see them at home. It's a really great matchup for the Seattle Seahawks. Arguably could be in that top 5, but I just have the Cleveland Browns and Seattle Seahawks one tier below. Now we move into tier number 3. And we started off here with the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Vikings. And in this matchup, It's indoors, number one. -1.5 points for the Philadelphia Eagles, over under 42.5 points. I just believe, I'm not saying that there's going to be a ton of turnovers in this game. I don't believe that, but I just believe that they can get after the quarterback here. We'll have to see if Jalen Carter's going to be available. So that would be something that if you're looking to start the Philadelphia Eagles, you might want to make sure Jalen Carter is starting, because I feel like as much as him and Davis together, they look really good. I think they can definitely get some pressures this week. Now, this is not some defense that you're going to be able to pick off the waiver wire, though, because they are 97% rostered. And so definitely have them here, like it a lot here for the Philadelphia Eagles. Now we move into the next team in this tier, and it's going to be the Houston Texans, who are going up against the Seahawks. And like I said, the line is -3 for the Seahawks, over under 41.5. Like I said, this is going to be a deeper spot for me this week with the Houston Texans. And we look at them as a whole, and they've had a good amount of sacks this season. Even going into week 5 versus Baltimore, they only had 1 sack, but put up 11 fantasy points, 14 fantasy points versus Tennessee with 2 sacks, 2 sacks the week before that, 4 sacks versus Tampa Bay, and then versus the Rams had 3 sacks. And versus Tampa Bay and the Rams, which are we're looking at as 2 of the top 2 offenses this season, they put up 7 and 8 fantasy points respectively. And so that is, for me, when we're looking at them, they are definitely getting tackles for loss with those great edges that they have with Will Anderson. And overall, I want to be taking a shot here on the Houston Texans. They are 36% rostered. So like I said, kind of sliding right on in to my overall tier rankings. I think it's valuable to have the Houston Texans here as my 9th overall defense. My 10th overall defense is going to be the Rams, who are going up against Jacksonville. The thing with the Rams, who are maybe been a top 3 defense this season, we just saw an absolutely impressive outing by the Rams, 19 fantasy points versus Baltimore. Now, with Jacksonville, it's a little bit of a tougher matchup. We're kind of starting to see this team start to produce some offensively, but Trevor Lawrence still has been trying to scramble. He has been taking a ton of sacks. And so for me, I want to be taking a shot on this Rams overall team. Now, they're, like I said, if they were going up against the Tennessee Titans, they would be up at the top of this ranking. But since the Rams, like I said, it's a 45.5 point game where they are -3.5. They've logged multiple takeaways this season in the 6 games that we've been looking at. So I like the Rams. I really just have them more as a middle floor play this week, because I just think that the Jacksonville Jaguars will score enough actual real life points on them to maybe pull their overall fantasy football day down. But you would be relying on this Rams team to hopefully get some turnovers on Trevor Lawrence. But Trevor Lawrence has been scrambling more. So I guess that's a little bit of my other thought process, is this offense is continuing to evolve overall. Now, last tier of defenses here, I would say this is the volatile matchup dependent tier. We started off with number 11, and it's going to be the Minnesota Vikings. And I know the Vikings are going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, which seems like a death sentence, but I still feel like this is the typical, like, there's a very, 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 very low floor, but there is a little bit of upside. And the main reason I would say that is just comes with them playing indoors. I like this matchup, and I understand that a turnover could absolutely swing this game. But with the expected points at 42.5, and with the idea that the Philadelphia Eagles are already kind of favorites here, I just want to be banking on the Minnesota Vikings here as my defense number 11. My defense number 12, it is going to be the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Rams. This is a middle-of-the-road game. Now, this could get a boost if we get word that, Puka Nacua is actually going to be out for 1, 2, 3 weeks. But even still, I mean, you still have Matthew Stafford, who's been slinging it. You still have Devontae Adams, Kyron Williams. So this offense is still very, 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 very good. But the Jacksonville Jaguars have also been getting after the quarterback. And right now on the season, they have been a top 7 defense overall. So with this line, it's a fine floor, is kind of how I view it. Fine floor streamer. But I definitely wouldn't be kind of banking on them being that number 1 defense that they've been the past few weeks. And right now, they're only 39% roster. So if you do need to be streaming some defenses, Jacksonville Jaguars, 100% a good option for you in week 7 fantasy football. Now, a few more teams, and we'll just quickly highlight these. These are going to be the Chargers, the Detroit Lions, and the Miami Dolphins. Chargers going up against the Colts. I understand it's not the most conducive matchup, especially with the way that Daniel Jones has been absolutely targeting and flipping defenses on their head. But we have seen 3 interceptions this last week for the Chargers. We saw them start to get some pressure, and they put up 8 fantasy points, even with giving up 27 points in a game. And so I like this matchup for the Chargers. They're a top 15 defense for me this week. The next defense is going to be the Lions versus the Buccaneers. Now, it's going to be in the Dome. It's a home game. We just saw the Detroit Lions lose to the Kansas City Chiefs. So you're praying for red zone stops because Baker Mayfield has been playing like an MVP caliber quarterback. But the thing that is kind of up in air here with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is you got Emeka Egbuka who goes down with a hamstring injury. You also have no Bucky Irving. Mike Evans, is he going to return this week? He hasn't even practiced yet. Chris Godwin's going to be out. I understand Baker Mayfield looked decent with Tez Johnson and with Sterling Shepard, but you don't want to be having to rely on those guys for a whole game, especially versus Detroit Lions front 7 that it can really get after the quarterback. And so for me, I think if you're super, super desperate, Detroit Lions would be a decent play. And then my number 15 is going to be the Miami Dolphins. Like I said, the over-under is super low with it being at 41.5 points. Cleveland always plays slow and conservative, especially with Dylan Gabriel. We saw them really struggle to move the ball in week 6, but my issue continues to be that this Miami Dolphins offense hasn't really helped the defense at all. So I just think it's a pretty it's a high floor, but it's a very low ceiling type offense for the Miami Dolphins this week. And so, like I said, I'm not going to be 100% banking on the Miami Dolphins as an offense that I want to be personally starting in fantasy football. But if you like defensive rankings, if you like winning, hit that like and subscribe button. Ask any start sit question down below, and we will answer it for you. Appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.